Hi, everybody. I'm Alexander Shu, a postdoctoral fellow here at the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion at the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. Um, the Ansari Institute is interested in promoting the study of religion around the world, or religions around the world, and looking especially at how they engage with either non-religious actors and other religions in a global affairs framework. Um, to that end, we are interested in all forms of religious and interreligious and non-religious dialogues between faith leaders, faith adherents, academics, policymakers, peacemakers as well. And so to that end, today I am speaking with Dr. Charles Wesley Powell, a professor of Christian Muslim dialogue here at Holy Cross College in Notre Dame, and one of Ansari's beloved affiliate faculty. Dr. Powell, how are you today?
Good morning, Alex. I'm doing fine. Thank you. Good to be with you and Charlie.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a question that I also asked Charlie. What does global engagement with religion mean to you? When did you start engaging with religion, and did it become global at one point, or was it always global?
Sure. Well, to back up just a little bit, I'll tell you where I was born and give you just a brief introduction to who I am and why I'm here with you now. And then I'll get into this question of what global engagement with religion means to me. I was born in a little town in Magee, Mississippi. Back in the year 1976, I was a bicentennial baby. I was born to Charles and Rose Powell, and my parents lived in Magee for about 3.5 years after I was born. And then unfortunately, divorce took place. My mother would later remarry, and we moved to the panhandle of Florida. I grew up in Crestview, Florida, which is not too far from travel destination for many people. We are just north of Destin, Florida, the Destin, Fort Walton Beach area. You have a lot of beautiful Rivieras around the world. Some have called that particular area between Pensacola and Panama City, Florida, the Redneck Riviera. I have told people that I grew up in LA, which is lower Alabama. But anyhow, I grew up in Crestview, Florida, and went to school at Baker School. I attended Baker High School and also another school just south of the area, Niceville High School. And I grew up in an area where I did not really know any people of color. I did not know anybody that wasn't Southern Baptist or Pentecostal or Presbyterian or Assembly of God. I believe there was one Catholic church in the community. It was, at the time at least, it seemed to me as though it was on the outskirts of town, and I didn't know anyone who attended there. I grew up in a school where we, at least at the time, my recollection is we had one African American in my graduating class. I remember her name to this day, and I remember we all got along just fine. There was no ill words spoken towards people of a different color. I really did not know what it meant to be racist. Never really had that opportunity to be. That was not the area that I grew up in. Grew up very much in the country slash military community, because Crestview, Florida is a suburb of sorts of the Eglin Air Force Base. And so we were around a lot of people who had been to all different parts of the world. Nonetheless, the people that I affiliated myself with, that I associated with every day, they were primarily just like me. And so that's a bit of the culture that I grew up in. I did not know any Muslims at all. I probably could not have told you at the time in my early years where Iraq or Iran was, or rather is. And so it's been quite a journey for me through the years, finding out that the world that we live in, on one hand, it is a global village, but on the other hand, it is an incredibly large world. made up of many different ethnicities, many different cultures. And over the course of the last several years, I've had the opportunity to engage with religion in many different ways. Uh, I attended the Baptist College of Florida in Graceville, Florida. I did my undergraduate degree in theology there. While there, I was a radio disc jockey for Southern Gospel Radio, and that's how I put myself through college with a little bit of help from my parents. And then from there, I went on to the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where I studied divinity. It was living in Mississippi again that I had the opportunity to meet who is now my wife, Emilia Justina Powell. Emilia and I married back in 2001. And Emilia came from Poland, and she was very interested in studying political science with a heavy emphasis in international law. So she went to school, did her PhD. Meanwhile, I continued to do my degree. I almost complete my degree at the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, but then we moved to Savannah, Georgia area, and I wound up completing my Master of Divinity at the Luther Rice College and Seminary in Lithonia, Georgia. During this time, Emilia is teaching in a university. She is beginning to travel more, and I have the opportunity to travel some with her. And so that's really what begins my engagement with religion. So what does global engagement with religion mean to me? Global engagement with religion means, at least to me, delving into the faith mysteries of people, past and present. It is not only a study of theology, but I believe that it is a study of anthropology. It is having courage to question one's own faith tradition in light of other faith traditions in a constructive manner that is willing to pivot when necessary. And through the years, I've had to do a lot of pivoting in my thinking, in my actions. And I have to say that this journey is a very difficult one. It is not for the faint-hearted. But having said that, it is an extremely rewarding encounter. And I've had many of them over the course of especially the last 15 years of my life. Global engagement with religion, I believe, begins with me and my willingness, and to some large part, my ability to hear the faith tradition of others. Furthermore, I think it is to be cognizant of the reality that the leading reason I am the faith, and this is some of what Charlie alluded to when you were interviewing him, but the reason I am the faith that I am is primarily due to whom and where I was born, and so is the case for all of us. And I believe that this creates, or at least should create, a humbleness. It certainly creates a humbleness within me, and it allows me to have narrative empathy for all of humanity, religious or not. This really plays out into the commandment of Christ to love your neighbor as yourself. John Piper, a very influential American author, a Reformed Baptist pastor and chancellor at Bethlehem College and Seminary, said, in reference to this commandment to love one's neighbor, he said, it seems to demand that I literally tear the skin off my body and wrap it around another person so that I feel that I am that other person. And all the longings that I have for my own safety and health and success and happiness, I now feel for that other person as though he or she were me. I don't know the exact tally of how many faiths there are around the globe, but most fall within 8 or 9 categories. There is, of course, the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. There is Hinduism and Buddhism, Confucianism, various mythologies. There are new revelations, etc. I primarily focus on Christianity and Islam and the relationship that can be had between these two faith traditions. Now, As a whole, the Abrahamic faiths comprise nearly 4.4 billion people. So on the one hand, I approach global engagement with religion with a desire that all people come to know, love, and serve Christ. On the other hand, I engage for the purpose of fostering freedom of religion, sanctity of life, promoting understanding and appreciation of faith traditions, and creating this global community whereby just peace, not peace, but just peace is secured, and the abuse of power and, frankly, evil actions, actions that harm others purposefully, are kept at bay by good people of faith. Now, how does this happen? See, I'm a firm believer that dialogue isn't just you and me coming together and having a conversation, but acting on that conversation, looking at ways that we can strategize to bring an end to many of the problems that the world faces on a universal level. So how does this happen? Well, I believe that I must go into the world via the modes of social interaction and connect, but not just connect, collaborate. Collaborate when possible, thus creating and fostering meaningful relationships and partnerships that value human interaction, that promotes the common good. And I think that is what global engagement with religion means to me, and that is why I am very happy to be a faculty affiliate at the Ansari Institute and to have the opportunity beginning in the fall to teach Christian-Muslim dialogue at Holy Cross College here at Notre Dame.
Thank you for that introduction and the stump speech. um, let's back up a little bit
Okay.
and talk about your engagement with your own Baptist tradition. If we want to call it local engagement or hyper-local engagement within the Southern Baptists Convention, when did you discern that you had a calling to be a minister, to be a pastor, and how did that evolve over the years?
Sure. I appreciate the question. I do enjoy telling the story. I was 4 years old. When I was 4 years old, there was something that impressed me, not only about my church, but about the preacher in my church. I fell in love with the preacher, watching him Sunday after Sunday and Wednesday after Wednesday and throughout the week. I enjoyed listening to his stories. He was a father figure to me. He encouraged me weekly. And as a young boy, that meant a lot to me, especially since my father and mother had divorced when I was 3.5 years old. My mother went on to remarry, and I did not get to know my biological father. I really have no memories of him whatsoever until later in life, when I would go and show up on his front porch and knock on his door. So here I was, for most of my life, I really felt like a redheaded stepchild. And I needed, because I did have red hair and I was a stepchild, and I really needed to find security in my life. And for me, my relationship with God transcended all the problems that I encountered that was out of my control. And the pastor, I saw him as a great leader, as a man of God, and that meant something powerful to me then. So that was when I was 4. Well, let's fast forward now several years later. I'm 17 years old, and I began to feel this desire, this urge within me to preach. Well, I was a very shy young man. If you said hi to me prior to this time, I would have crawled under a table. I would have been blushing. I was not one who wanted to be noticed by anybody. So how was this shy boy who lived out in the country, how was he ever going to muster up the strength and the courage to stand in front of a group of people and preach? It was a God thing. That's the only way I can explain it. And there were certain series of steps that I took, baby steps. But at 17 years of age, I was given the opportunity to preach at a church in Baker, Florida, the Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. And the pastor there knew of my interest in joining the ministry. And it was one of these weeks where youth were invited to stand up and take charge of the service. And I was invited to preach. And so what did I do? I turned to the book of Revelation, one of the most challenging and difficult books in all of the Bible and in all of the world to comprehend, to understand. And I preached on the book of Revelation. And I think I went on for about an hour. When I got done, people were very, very happy that I had finally concluded my sermon. And I was very happy that I had concluded it as well. Now, looking back, I don't remember what I preached. I just remembered I preached out of Revelation. But I did receive encouragement. And it was out of that encouragement that I went on to pursue preaching and teaching in the Baptist church, in the Southern Baptist denomination, a denomination of nearly 16 million people today.
How many churches did you end up preaching at?
Sure.
And what congregation did you have when 9/11 happened and changed things in this country in a big way?
Uh, sure. So when I was a young boy, I remember how scared people were of AIDS. I recall the bombings of the federal building in Oklahoma in 1995. Growing up along the Gulf Coast, I encountered and lived through several major hurricanes. I recall watching CNN and later other news sources that talked about attacks on American embassies, Navy ships being targeted and bombed during the Clinton administration. I, of course, remember the first Persian Gulf War. And then there was 9/11 that you reference. Then following the Iraq War. I was living in Tuscaloosa, Alabama when the mighty tornado of 2011 left devastation in its path. And now, of course, we're living through this COVID-19 pandemic. The history of the world informs me that we are always either on the verge of trouble, we are in trouble, or we are coming out of trouble. There have been wars and rumors of wars with us since the very beginning. And tragic loss of life occurs around the world every year. Of course, when it takes place on our own soil, in our own backyard, it takes on a very different dynamic. It becomes very personal. And so to your question regarding 9/11 and where I was newly married. I was an associate pastor at the Live Oak Baptist Church in Crestview, Florida. I was preparing my breakfast, getting dressed, getting ready to go into church, and I receive a telephone call from my mother saying, "Turn on the news, something terrible is happening." And quickly, my wife, Emilia, and I, we go into the living room, we turn on the television, and I believe it was Dan Ruther at the time we were watching, and behind him we saw an airplane hit the Twin Towers. And we began to watch like everyone else living at that time that had access to media. We began to watch all of this unfold. It was a scary moment. 9/11, Alex, is what instigated my interest in the religious other. In the years following and up to now, I came to understand that Christians and Muslims share a common faith and a common fate. This past summer, I had the opportunity to engage in the Global Symposium on Interreligious Dialogue in Muscat, Oman at the Alamana Center. And while I was there, I sat at the table with Rabbi Mark Schneier. Rabbi Mark Schneier is the founder and president for the Foundation of Ethnic Understanding. And he's also the founder of the Northampton Synagogue in New York City. And as I sat with him, he said, "Charles, remember this." And I remember this now, and I think it will always stay with me. And it's what I just shared with you. He said, "Charles, listen to me and remember, we share a common faith," referring to the Abrahamic faiths, "and we share a common fate." And what he was saying to me is, we have to learn how to get along. If we don't learn how to get along, we're going to kill each other, and we are going to eliminate, we are going to deprive the world of peace and prosperity. Shortly after 9/11, I accepted the call of pastoring the Airport Boulevard Baptist Church in Mobile, Alabama. So prior to this, I had been a radio disc jockey. I had preached at a few different churches. I was a radio preacher. I was an associate pastor at a few churches. I did children's ministry. I did youth ministry. I did senior adult ministry. 9/11 happened, of course, in September. And then it was shortly thereafter that I accepted the call of pastoring the church in Mobile. And if memory serves me correctly, I was the youngest pastor in the Mobile Baptist Association at that time. Moreover, I embarked upon a very challenging ministry. The Airport Boulevard Baptist Church consisted of an older congregation. The congregation had plateaued. Unfortunately, the church had experienced in the past some splits. So in a way, the church started other churches. But it was an older congregation. It had plateaued. It was in decline. And frankly, I don't think they could afford a pastor who had more experience or more wisdom or more age than me. So they looked for a young man that they could get to come in that was ambitious, that was energetic, and I fit that bill for them. But I was very sincere about this ministry, and I felt it was my responsibility to jumpstart the heart of the church and lead the people to engage with the community, thus becoming a very vibrant and healthy and Christ-centered church. And I had a lot of fun while I was there. There were ups and downs. There were certainly many challenges. But Alex and Charlie, I was a young minister. And I tell you today that I made some mistakes while I was there. Now, God is merciful. All in all, God bless the efforts put forth. The church did grow, and the church continues to do God's work in the Mobile and surrounding community and in the world today. But I mention this because it was in this ministry that I had to take the lead in offering guidance to so many people. People who were fighting emotions of anger and fear and insecurity. These were raw emotions, and they were felt by many Americans, but not just Americans, really people all over the world who value human life and the dignity of life. These were real emotions, and they needed attention. So I had to ask myself I think I was 25 years old at this time, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to answer these questions? How am I going to provide direction so that the emotions that all these people are feeling are placed in a right context, a context that doesn't foster even inadvertently more anger and fear and insecurity? And early on, I realized, though I was adequate in many different ways, I was not adequate at the time to address these emotions and feelings because I did not know enough about Islam. I was shocked, as a matter of fact, that I knew so little about the second largest religion in the world. So what did I do? I listened. I listened to what other faith leaders within the Southern Baptist denomination were saying, as well as the greater evangelical community. And what did I do? I ran with their sound bites. When it came to me preaching on the topic of Islam, I was not prepared. And I know that at times I was misinformed, I was uninformed, I was ignorant, I was at times arrogant, I was naive. But at least I knew it was not right in our faith tradition for us to harbor hatred and to be the mean-spirited people that we saw others being. We were not to be mean-spirited towards Muslims or anybody for that matter. So in my preaching, I emphasized love for stranger, love for neighbor, and love for enemy. Alex, I had a lot of preconceived ideas about Islam in this first ministry, and I had to wrestle with this after 9/11. I served at Airport Boulevard Baptist Church for 4 years, and then I moved to the Savannah Baptist Association in Savannah, Georgia, where I participated in and became pastor of a church plant, a new church. And it's here that I really begin to transition. Charlie mentioned earlier how he transitioned from really missionary to peacemaker. It is here where I began to transition from pastor to peacemaker. In 2008, Barack Obama was running for president. Many of my colleagues were fully convinced that he was Muslim. Now, mind you, he said he wasn't. He said he was Methodist, but they continue to say, no, he's not, he's Muslim. And that he was going to bring about the end of our democracy as we knew it. Tensions were high within my congregation and the denomination. Again, keep in mind, this is still after 9/11. People still have very raw emotions. And many, if not most, evangelical leaders during this time, they were demonizing the Prophet Muhammad. They were speaking ill of the Muslim majority, and there was collaboration on a large scale through social media and news feeds and the local church to encourage congregants to not vote for Barack Hussein Obama. Once again, what was I going to do? How would I lead my people through this? What did I think about what was going on and being said? And at this point, I did a lot of listening to both sides of the spectrum. And I decided to preach a short series on Islam, though looking back, it was still creating an us against them atmosphere. So Alex, the long and short end of this story is after 9/11, I was not prepared mentally, nor was I prepared spiritually to be an effective leader of truth during this time. I still think I did more good than harm, but I still did some harm. And that takes me to the next part of my story that we can pick up in time, one of which I elaborate upon in my book manuscript that is currently under review at Notre Dame Press.
Well, let's talk about that book. As I understand it, the title is Empathizing with Muslims, A Path to Dialogue for Southern Baptists. How did you begin authentic dialogue with partners that gave you helpful, useful, godly information?
Sure. This was quite the journey. And I have to give credit where credit is due. It was hands down my wife, Emilia, who really kept me questioning everything that I said and everything that I did as it related to my understanding of Islam. And so when we moved to the University of Notre Dame in 2011, my wife came here to teach. I wasn't sure at the time what I was going to do. I thought about pastoring a church in the area. It was proposed that maybe I start a new church plant. One thing led to another, and I looked around. I said, there are plenty of churches here. Most of them aren't full. There's no reason that I should open up another church. And during this time, I began to question, who am I? What am I going to do? All of my identity was wrapped up in being a Southern Baptist minister. So when I came here, I began to look for work at Notre Dame. And early on, I started work at Notre Dame. I went to work at the Innovation Park at Notre Dame, worked there for 5 years. During this time, I decided to go back to school, and I engaged in my doctoral studies at Catholic Theological Union, and I became very influenced by several of my colleagues and several of my professors, and became absolutely fascinated and intrigued with this idea of Christian-Muslim dialogue. So the Southern Baptist denomination, thinking about what is now my book, the Southern Baptist denomination represents, as I mentioned earlier, the largest Protestant religious group in the United States, nearly 16 million people, most of which are found in the American South. Since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, there has been an increased tone of negative rhetoric among Southern Baptists towards Muslims. So in my book, I ask, to what extent a lack of narrative empathy towards Muslims can be altered in the life of the Southern Baptist leader. So my goal here, I want to alter this understanding of Muslims in Southern Baptist life. But why do I want to do this? I want to do this to enable Southern Baptist leaders in particular. It can be, it certainly can be expanded into the greater evangelical community, but to better understand and communicate the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, teachings that I believe promote spiritual discipline and peaceful living. Very similar, in fact, to ours as Catholics, as Protestants. My theoretical framework and the in-depth qualitative interviews that I conduct provide invaluable insights into the dynamics and use of anti-Islamic rhetoric among Southern Baptists. So what I do in my book, I propose concrete strategies of action, such as strategic personal encounters between Southern Baptist leaders and their Muslim counterparts, which, when combined with some Islamic literacy, can help uncover the Southern Baptist denomination's preconceived prejudices and misunderstandings of Islam. And I want to say very clearly, my research revealed that Southern Baptists are not racist towards Muslims. There is simply preconceived ideas and misunderstandings. There is a lack of narrative empathy that is there. That's not to say that some people don't have racist tendencies, but as a whole, in the leaders that I interviewed and in the people that I spoke with, it is not racism that drives this, these feelings of anger and insecurity, etc. It's just a misunderstanding. And so I believe my book offers very crucial practical implications, and that's why I wrote it. And yet, to my attention, to my knowledge, there has been very little scholarly attention given to it. My work certainly extends far beyond the realm of Southern Baptist life, and that's why I'm glad to engage with you and with Charlie and with the Ansari Institute, because it goes beyond Southern Baptist life and practice. I believe it includes the greater evangelical community, a community that doesn't have a specific spokesperson and body, such as the Catholic Church, that engages in purposeful dialogue with Muslims. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think these words really speak to the idea that I have of needing to create and foster narrative empathy through literacy, dialogue, and immersion. And to answer and to come to a standstill here on this question that you ask, I want to share with you these words of Dr. Martin Luther King. He said this: "Men often hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they cannot communicate, and they cannot communicate because they are separated." So Alex, Charlie, to those who are listening, my goal in writing this book and my goal in engaging in this sort of multi-faith dialogue, especially between Christians and Muslims, is that I want to bring people together whereby they see the human in each other.
Thank you for that. I want to touch on a term that you've used a couple of times now, and I'm wondering if our audience is curious as well. Narrative empathy, as opposed to ordinary empathy, empathy where I just say, "Oh, I feel you," versus something deeper and more sustained. Could you tell us a little bit more about this key term of yours?
Absolutely. So Susan Keene is probably one of the leading scholars on the topic of narrative empathy. And I read a lot of her work, and what I appreciated about much of what Susan Keene wrote is that narrative empathy goes beyond regular empathy. It literally allows you to place your whole life into the shoes of the other person. This can happen in many different ways. I particularly champion immersion. I think that one of the best experiences that anybody can have especially when it comes to understanding the religious other, of which I am one of the religious other to somebody else, is to immerse oneself in the culture of that person. I remember when I first traveled to Muscat, Oman. I landed in the airport, and when I stepped out of the plane and walked through the terminal, all of a sudden, I saw people who were dressed very differently than me. I saw fathers and mothers and children laughing, enjoying themselves. I saw people eating and drinking, and they were just living a very normal life. I get into the car and I travel to the hotel, and during my week and a half stay, I am going to Old Muscat. I am walking downtown. I'm touring historical sites. I'm driving my car into the countryside. I'm getting to know people locally. And I was just taken aback how they were getting along, how happy they were. As a matter of fact, many of them seemed happier than most people I see in America. It was so good to see fathers playing with their children. It was so nice to see along the beach shore. They had blankets laid out and they were enjoying picnics. They were playing soccer. They were enjoying life. On one of these occasions, while I was there, I was in the cab and I was engaged. My wife and I, we were engaged in conversation with the cab driver. And we said to the cab driver, we use these words love. We said the word love. We said, we love Muscat, Oman. We love the Omani people. And you would have thought that we spoke gold to this man. His hands went off the steering wheel up in the air and said, no, we love you. We are so glad that you are here. We love you. And I will always remember that throughout my life, how they wanted to embrace me as much as I wanted to embrace them, because we saw the humanity in each other. Are there distinctions? There are. But there are many similarities, and there are many ways that we can work together. And so when I think of narrative empathy, it is really immersion. It is immersion in a way that allows you and allows me to walk in their shoes, to experience their language, to experience their cultural dynamics. Because once you encounter that, you come back a different person. And you don't just have to go to somewhere in the Middle East or North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa or wherever or China to meet people of a different faith. You can meet people of different faith here. But it's the ability to humble oneself and say, I am who I am, not because I chose to be here, not because I chose to be white, not because I chose this or that, but I am a product of my culture. I am a product of my upbringing. Do we change during life? Absolutely. I'll never forget the interview conducted with Michael Jackson. And he was asked, the interviewer said, Michael, it seems as though you've changed a lot through the years. And of course, the interviewer was referring to the looks of Michael Jackson, not only the style of his music. And I remember Michael Jackson just saying, people change. People change. How true that is. We do change. But when we initially come into this world, we have no say-so in it. And so that helps me, through narrative empathy, that helps me have a humility and an appreciation for those who come from other walks of life. I love them as human beings. And to me, before one can begin authentic, constructive dialogue and evangelism or whatever else, that person in front of you must first know that you love him or you love her genuinely as a human being. And if they can love you back, what an incredible journey that will be. And a journey of dialogue, a journey of understanding, a journey of partnerships.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it seems like what you're saying about narrative empathy is that in order to love somebody, you need a story. You need their story,
Mm,
right? You need to know where they're coming from and where they're going and where they are right now.
yes.
And on that note, I want to thank you for your time today
Yeah.
and for
Thank you.
letting us know where you came from, where you're going, where you are right now. And right now, we are all experiencing the Christian celebration of Good Friday all together, but locked in our separate houses to observe social distancing for COVID-19.
Mm,
Um, Thank you, everybody, for joining us today
thank you.
with this conversation, for our conversation with Dr. Powell. I want to encourage anyone who's watching to contact us at ansari@nd.edu or to follow us and reply to our Twitter account at ansariund. Um, Thank you all for tuning in. I hope to be back with Dr. Powell and some of our other friends shortly. Um, Thank you again.